Maria Santos clutched her 3-month-old daughter Isabella closer to her chest as the black SUV pulled up outside her small apartment building. She had been watching from behind the torn curtains for the past hour, knowing they would come today. The baby stirred in her arms, making soft cooing sounds that normally brought joy to Maria's heart. Today, those sounds felt like tiny daggers of fear. The apartment was barely furnished with a second-hand couch, a small table, and a crib that her neighbor had given her when Isabella was born. The walls were thin, and she could hear Mrs. Rodriguez next door humming while she cooked dinner. The smell of beans and rice drifted through the air, reminding Maria that she hadn't eaten anything since yesterday morning. Her stomach growled, but hunger was the least of her worries now. 3 men stepped out of the SUV. Maria recognized the tall one with the scar running down his left cheek. His name was Carlos Mendez, and he worked for the loan sharks who had given her husband, Roberto, the money for his failed business venture. Roberto had promised her it would be different this time. He said the small grocery store would make them enough money to pay back the loan and start a new life. But Roberto had a gambling problem that he kept hidden from Maria until it was too late. When the store failed after 6 months, Roberto disappeared one night, leaving only a note that said he was sorry and that he would send money when he could. That was 4 months ago, and Maria hadn't heard from him since. The debt collectors had been patient at first, giving her time to figure out how to pay. But patience had run out. And now they wanted their money or something of equal value. Maria's phone buzzed with a text message from her sister Anna, who lived 3 states away. "Did you find a way to pay them back?" the message read. Maria had called Anna yesterday, crying and desperate, but Anna was a single mother herself, working 2 jobs just to keep her own family afloat. There was no way she could help with the $25,000 that Roberto owed. The heavy footsteps on the stairs made Isabella wake up completely. She began to cry, and Maria tried to rock her gently while her own hands shook with terror. She had worked at the diner for 3 years before Isabella was born, but they let her go when she couldn't find reliable child care. The unemployment checks had stopped coming 2 weeks ago, and she had already sold everything valuable she owned just to buy baby formula and diapers. A loud knock echoed through the apartment. "Mrs. Santos, we know you're in there," Carlos called through the door. His voice was calm but carried an unmistakable threat. "We need to talk about your husband's debt." Maria looked around the tiny apartment one more time. The baby's clothes were folded neatly in a basket by the window. Isabella's favorite stuffed elephant sat on the couch where Maria had been feeding her just an hour ago. These simple things represented everything Maria had left in the world, and she knew she was about to lose them. She walked slowly to the door, still holding Isabella. Her bare feet were cold against the worn linoleum floor. The peephole showed Carlos standing directly in front of the door with his 2 associates flanking him on either side. One of them was checking his watch impatiently. The other was looking up and down the hallway as if making sure no neighbors were watching. "Please," Maria said through the door, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need more time. I'm trying to find work, but it's hard with the baby." "Time's up, Mrs. Santos," Carlos replied. "Your husband made promises he couldn't keep, and now someone has to pay the price. We've been more than fair, but our boss is getting impatient. Open the door." Maria's legs felt weak. She had heard stories about what happened to people who couldn't pay their debts to these men. Some disappeared completely. Others were found weeks later in hospitals with injuries that would never fully heal. But she had never heard of them taking a baby before. The thought made her stomach turn with a sickness that went beyond hunger. Isabella had stopped crying and was now looking up at her mother with wide, trusting eyes. Those eyes were the same deep brown as Roberto's, and for a moment, Maria felt a flash of anger at her missing husband. How could he leave them to face this alone? How could he put their daughter in danger for money that he had probably lost at a poker table within days of borrowing it? The knocking came again, louder this time. "We're not going anywhere, Mrs. Santos. Make this easy on yourself and open the door. We just want to talk." Maria knew that talking wasn't really what they had come for. She had seen Carlos talking to her landlord yesterday when she went to check the mail. The landlord, Mr. Peterson, had avoided making eye contact with her afterward. She suspected that Carlos already knew she had no money, no job, and no way to pay what Roberto owed. They were here for something else. She thought about calling the police, but what would she tell them? That her husband had borrowed money from dangerous people, and now they wanted to collect. The police would ask for evidence, and Maria had nothing but Roberto's confession note, which didn't prove anything about who he borrowed money from. Besides, these men knew how to make things look legal when they needed to. The baby started to fuss again, sensing her mother's distress. Maria began to pace the small space between the couch and the kitchen, bouncing Isabella gently and making shushing sounds. The apartment suddenly felt smaller than ever, like the walls were closing in on them. The afternoon sunlight coming through the window seemed dimmer now, as if clouds had covered the sun. "Mrs. Santos, we can hear the baby crying," Carlos called out. "You don't want to upset her more than necessary. Let us in, and we can discuss this like civilized people." Maria stopped pacing. She realized that they knew about Isabella, and that knowledge terrified her more than anything else. Had they been watching her? Did they know her routine? Did they know that she walked to the corner store every Tuesday to buy formula, or that she sometimes sat in the small park across the street when the apartment got too stuffy? Her hands were shaking so badly now that she was afraid she might drop the baby. She sat down on the couch and tried to think clearly. Roberto's note had said he owed money to some business partners. But Maria now understood that these weren't the kind of partners who filed lawsuits when payments were missed. These were the kind who took what they thought was owed to them, regardless of the law. The knocking stopped, and Maria heard Carlos talking to someone in the hallway. His voice was too quiet to understand the words, but she could hear the serious tone. Then came the sound of footsteps going back down the stairs. For a moment, Maria allowed herself to hope that they had given up for today. Maybe they would come back tomorrow, giving her one more night to figure out what to do. But then she heard the sound of a key turning in the lock. Her heart stopped. Mr. Peterson had given them a key. The door opened slowly, and Carlos stepped inside, followed by his two associates. They filled the small apartment with their presence, making the already tiny space feel suffocating. "Sorry about the dramatic entrance," Carlos said, closing the door behind them, "but we really needed to have this conversation, and you weren't being very cooperative." Maria stood up from the couch, holding Isabella protectively. "Please don't hurt my baby," she whispered. "She hasn't done anything wrong." Carlos looked at the baby for a long moment, and his expression softened slightly. "Nobody wants to hurt an innocent child, Mrs. Santos. But your husband put you both in a very difficult situation. $25,000 is a lot of money, and our boss doesn't just forgive debts because someone runs away." One of the other men, a stocky guy with tattoos covering his arms, started looking around the apartment. He opened the refrigerator, which contained only a half-empty bottle of formula and some leftover rice from 2 days ago. He checked the cabinets, finding them mostly empty except for baby supplies and a few cans of soup. "There's nothing here, Carlos," the man said. "This place has been cleaned out already." Carlos nodded and turned back to Maria. "We figured as much. You've been trying to survive on nothing for months now. That's admirable, really, but it doesn't solve our problem." The third man, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "The boss suggested a temporary arrangement," he said. "Something that would give you time to get the money together while ensuring we have appropriate collateral for the debt." Maria's blood ran cold. "What kind of arrangement?" Carlos sat down on the couch, making himself comfortable in her home. "The baby would come with us for a while. Don't worry, she'll be well taken care of, better than you can manage right now, to be honest, You'll have 60 days to come up with the money. When you pay the debt, you get your daughter back." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. She stumbled backward until she hit the wall, still clutching Isabella. "You can't take my baby. That's kidnapping. That's illegal." "Actually," Carlos said, pulling out some official-looking papers from his jacket, "your husband signed these documents when he took the loan. They list his family as collateral in case of default. I know it sounds harsh, but this is how these arrangements work. The baby will be safe, I promise you that. She'll probably eat better and sleep in a nicer place than this." Maria looked at the papers, but the words blurred together through her tears. She couldn't believe Roberto would sign something like that. But then again, she couldn't believe he would abandon them either. The man she had married seemed to be capable of anything when money was involved. "I won't let you take her," Maria said, though her voice shook with fear. "I'll fight you." The stocky man with tattoos stepped closer. "Mrs. Santos, please don't make this harder than it has to be. We're not the bad guys here. Your husband is the one who put you in this position. We're just trying to collect what we're owed." Isabella started crying again, and Maria realized the baby could sense the tension in the room. She tried to comfort her daughter while her mind raced, looking for any way out of this nightmare. The apartment had no back exit, and the fire escape was outside the bedroom window. Even if she could get to it, she would never make it down 3 floors with a baby before they caught her. "How do I know you'll really give her back if I get the money?" Maria asked. "You have our word," Carlos said, "and these papers create a legal record of the arrangement. Look, Mrs. Santos, we understand this is difficult, but think about it from our perspective. We can't just let people walk away from their debts. It would be bad for business." Maria looked down at Isabella, who had calmed down and was now gripping her mother's finger with her tiny hand. That little hand was so perfect, so innocent. The idea of strangers taking care of her, of not knowing if she was safe or scared, was unbearable. "What if I can't get the money in 60 days?" Maria asked. Carlos was quiet for a moment. "Let's not think about that right now. 60 days is a long time. You're a smart woman. You'll find a way." But his non-answer told Maria everything she needed to know. If she couldn't pay in 60 days, she would never see Isabella again. These men would disappear with her daughter, and there would be nothing Maria could do about it. The papers Carlos showed her might not even be real, but that didn't matter. These people operated outside the law anyway. The late afternoon sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the apartment floor. Maria realized that this might be the last time she held her daughter in their home. Tomorrow, Isabella's crib would be empty, and Maria would be completely alone with no way to pay a debt she hadn't even known existed until Roberto disappeared. "I need to pack some things for her," Maria said quietly. Carlos nodded. "Of course. Take your time. Pack whatever she needs." Maria walked to the bedroom, still carrying Isabella. She pulled out the small duffel bag she had used when going to the hospital for the birth. With shaking hands, she began folding tiny clothes and putting them in the bag. Diapers, formula, bottles, the stuffed elephant that Isabella loved to touch while falling asleep. Each item felt like she was packing away a piece of her heart. As she packed, Maria could hear the men talking quietly in the living room. She couldn't make out the words, but their casual tone made her angry. This was just another job for them, another debt to collect. They didn't understand that they were destroying the only family she had left. When she finished packing, Maria sat on the edge of the bed and held Isabella close. She whispered promises that she would find a way to get her back, that she would work day and night to get the money, that this separation wouldn't last long. But even as she said the words, Maria wasn't sure she believed them herself. The sun had almost completely set when Carlos called from the living room. "Mrs. Santos, it's time to go." Maria stood up slowly, feeling like her legs might give out. She walked back to the living room where the 3 men were waiting. Carlos had put the papers back in his jacket, and the other 2 men were standing by the door. "Remember, Carlos said. 60 days. We'll be in touch to let you know how to contact us when you have the money. Maria handed Isabella to Carlos, and it was the hardest thing she had ever done in her life. Isabella looked confused for a moment, then started to cry when she realized she was being held by a stranger. The sound of her daughter's cries echoed through the apartment as the three men walked toward the door. "Wait!" Maria called out. "What if she gets sick? What if she needs her mother?" Carlos paused at the door. "She'll be fine, Mrs. Santos. Children are more adaptable than you think." And then they were gone. Maria stood alone in her empty apartment, listening to the sound of the SUV driving away. Isabella's cries grew fainter and fainter until they disappeared completely, leaving only silence. The silence in the apartment was deafening. Maria sat on the floor where she had collapsed after the men left, staring at Isabella's empty crib. The stuffed elephant that hadn't fit in the bag sat alone on the couch, a cruel reminder of what had just happened. Outside, she could hear normal life continuing, cars driving by, children playing in the courtyard, Mrs. Rodriguez still humming next door. But for Maria, the world had stopped. She didn't know how long she sat there before the anger started to build. It began as a small flame in her chest and grew until it consumed her grief. Roberto had done this. Roberto had signed papers that put their baby at risk. Roberto had borrowed money from criminals and then run away like a coward, leaving Maria to face the consequences alone. Maria pulled herself up from the floor and walked to the bedroom. She opened the closet and pushed aside her clothes until she found the small shoebox hidden in the back corner. Inside were all the important documents Roberto had left behind when he disappeared. His Social Security card, their marriage certificate, bank statements from the failed store, and several business cards from people Maria didn't recognize. She spread everything out on the kitchen table and began looking through each item carefully. Most of the business cards were from suppliers who had worked with the grocery store, but one stood out. It was plain white with just a name and phone number printed in black ink. Victor Delacroix was all it said, with a local phone number written below. Maria had never heard Roberto mention this name before, but something about the simple card made her suspicious. Why would someone give Roberto a business card with no company name or address? She picked up her phone and dialed the number, her hands still shaking from everything that had happened. The phone rang 3 times before a man answered. "Yeah? Hello?" Maria said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm looking for Victor Delacroix. My husband, Roberto Santos, had your business card." There was a long pause. "Roberto's wife, huh? I heard he ran off and left you with his mess. That's rough." Maria's grip tightened on the phone. "You know about the debt?" "Lady, everyone in this business knows about Roberto's debt. 25 grand is serious money around here. Word is, Carlos Mendez picked up the collection contract from my boss. Is that why you're calling?" Maria realized she had found someone who might have information about the people who took Isabella. "They took my baby," she said. "They said it was collateral for the debt." Victor was quiet for a moment. "That's a new one, even for Carlos. Look, I don't usually get involved in other people's collection problems, but taking a baby crosses a line. You want to meet somewhere and talk about this?" "Yes," Maria said immediately. "When? Where?" "There's a diner called Mel's on Highway 9, about 20 miles north of the city. Can you get there tonight around 9? Maria looked at the clock. It was already past 7. "I'll be there. Ask for a table in the back section. I'll find you." The line went dead. Maria realized she had just agreed to meet a complete stranger who clearly worked in the same world as the men who took Isabella. But she didn't have any other options. The police wouldn't help with what was essentially a civil debt matter, especially when the paperwork Carlos showed her might make the whole thing look legal. Maria had $15 in her wallet and no car. She would have to take 2 buses to get to the diner, and she wasn't sure if the buses ran that late on Sunday night. She called the transit authority and learned that the last bus heading north left downtown at 8:15. If she hurried, she could just make it. She grabbed her jacket and the business card and ran down the stairs to the street. The neighborhood looked different at night, darker and more dangerous than during the day. Maria had walked these streets hundreds of times, but tonight she felt like everyone was watching her. Did these people know what had happened? Had Carlos told other criminals in the area that Roberto's wife was now fair game? The first bus was crowded with people getting off work from the late shift. Maria found a seat near the back and tried to think about what she would say to Victor. She didn't even know if he was someone who could help or someone who would make things worse. But he was the only lead she had, and she was willing to take any risk if it meant getting Isabella back. As the bus rumbled through the city streets, Maria thought about her daughter. Was Isabella crying for her mother right now? Did whoever was taking care of her know that she liked to be rocked in a specific way when she was fussy? Did they know that she slept better when someone hummed softly to her? The second bus was nearly empty. The driver, an older woman with kind eyes, noticed Maria's distressed appearance. "You okay, honey?" she asked when Maria got on. "My baby," Maria started to say, then stopped. How could she explain what had happened without sounding crazy? "I'm trying to get her back." The driver nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Sometimes we have to go places we don't want to go to protect our children," she said. "You be careful out there." Mel's Diner was a rundown place that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s. The neon sign flickered, and half the letters in Mel's were burned out. But there were several cars in the parking lot, so at least it was open. Maria pushed through the glass door and was hit by the smell of fried food and coffee that had been sitting too long. A tired-looking waitress with bleached blonde hair pointed toward the back of the restaurant when Maria asked about the back section. "Corner booth is empty," she said. "You want coffee while you wait?" Maria ordered coffee even though she couldn't afford to waste money on anything except necessities. But she needed to look normal, like a regular customer having a late dinner. She slid into the red vinyl booth and checked the time on her phone. 8:57. Victor should be here soon. The diner was the kind of place where people minded their own business. A truck driver sat at the counter reading a newspaper and eating pie. An elderly couple shared a plate of pancakes in a booth near the front. Two teenagers were playing music from their phones and laughing about something. Normal people living normal lives while Maria's world was falling apart. At exactly 9 o'clock, a man walked through the door and looked around the restaurant. He was shorter than Maria had expected, maybe in his 40s, with graying hair and a face that looked like it had seen too much trouble. He wore jeans and a black jacket, and his eyes scanned the room carefully before settling on Maria in the back booth. "You Roberto's wife?" he asked when he reached her table. Maria nodded. "You're Victor?" He slid into the booth across from her and signaled the waitress for coffee. "Let's get one thing straight right away," he said. "I'm not a good guy. I work for people who collect debts just like Carlos does. But I draw the line at certain things, and taking babies is one of them." The waitress brought Victor his coffee and refilled Maria's cup. When she walked away, Victor leaned forward and lowered his voice. "Tell me exactly what happened today." Maria recounted the events from the afternoon. From the knock on her door to watching the SUV drive away with Isabella. Victor listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or asking a clarifying question. When she finished, he sat back and shook his head. "Carlos is working for Tony Ricci now," Victor said. "Ricci took over most of the loan shark operations on the east side after the Martinez brothers got arrested last year. He's more ruthless than the old crew, but he's also more careful about covering his tracks." "What does that mean for my daughter?" Victor stirred his coffee slowly, thinking. "It means they probably have her somewhere safe, where they can take good care of her. Ricci's not stupid enough to actually hurt a baby. Too much heat from the cops if something happened." But it also means they're serious about collecting the debt. Maria felt a small relief knowing that Isabella was probably safe, but it didn't solve the bigger problem. I don't have $25,000. I don't even have $25. What about Roberto? You heard from him at all? Nothing since he left 4 months ago. Victor pulled out his phone and scrolled through some messages. I might be able to track him down. Roberto wasn't exactly careful about covering his tracks when he ran. But even if I find him, there's no guarantee he has the money to pay back the debt. Maria leaned forward. If you can find him, I'll make him face what he's done. This is his responsibility, not mine. Here's the thing, Victor said. Even if Roberto comes back and admits this is his fault, Ricci still wants his money. And Roberto probably gambled away whatever cash he had within a week of leaving town. Guys like your husband don't suddenly develop self-control when they run away from their problems. The truth of that statement hit Maria hard. She had been married to Roberto for 3 years, and she had seen him promise to quit gambling dozens of times. Each time she believed him because she wanted their marriage to work. Each time he disappointed her, but she had convinced herself that having a baby would change him. Instead, it had just given him more pressure, which led to more gambling and bigger debts. So what are my options? Maria asked. Victor was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, not good ones. You could try to borrow the money from a bank, but no bank is going to lend that much to someone with no income and no collateral. You could try to get a loan from another loan shark, but that would just create a different debt problem. You could try to negotiate with Ricci for more time, but 60 days is already generous by his standards. Maria felt the hope draining out of her. There has to be something I can do. Maybe, Victor said, but it would be dangerous and I can't guarantee it would work. Tell me. Victor looked around the diner to make sure no one was listening. There's a bounty hunter who works this area sometimes, goes by the name Jake Morrison. He specializes in tracking down people who skip out on debts or bail bonds. He's expensive, but he's good at finding people who don't want to be found. You think he could find Roberto? Probably, but here's the risky part. Morrison doesn't just find people. For the right price, he can also help with what he calls debt resolution. That's a fancy way of saying he sometimes helps people get out of situations like yours. Maria didn't understand. How would he help me? Victor lowered his voice even more. Morrison has connections with law enforcement. Real law enforcement, not the kind of cops who look the other way for guys like Ricci. If he could gather enough evidence that Ricci's operation is holding your baby illegally, he might be able to get the authorities involved. But Carlos showed me papers. Roberto signed something. Papers can be forged, Victor said. And even if they're real, using a baby as collateral for a debt might not hold up in court. The problem is proving that's what happened. Ricci's people are good at making things look legitimate. Maria thought about this. How much would this Morrison person charge? More than you have, Victor admitted. But Morrison sometimes takes unusual payment arrangements for cases that interest him. And a case involving a kidnapped baby would definitely interest him. The waitress came back and asked if they wanted to order food. Victor ordered a burger, but Maria said she wasn't hungry. The truth was that her stomach was so twisted with anxiety that she couldn't even think about eating. There's something else you should know, Victor said after the waitress left. If you go after Ricci through law enforcement, you're basically declaring war on his entire organization. Even if you get Isabella back, they'll remember that you caused problems for them. That could mean trouble for you later. Maria looked out the window at the dark parking lot. A few weeks ago, her biggest worry was whether she could afford to buy name-brand baby formula. Now she was sitting in a run-down diner, talking to a criminal about declaring war on other criminals. Her life had become something she never could have imagined. "What would you do if it was your child?" she asked Victor. He didn't hesitate. "I'd burn down their whole operation to get my kid back, but I'm not a young mother with no resources and no experience dealing with people like this. You need to think carefully about whether you're ready for what this might involve. Victor's burger arrived, and he ate while Maria stared into her coffee cup. She thought about Isabella sleeping in some stranger's house, probably confused about why her mother wasn't there. She thought about Roberto somewhere far away, probably not even knowing what his gambling had cost their family. She thought about sitting alone in her empty apartment while her daughter grew up without her. "Tell me how to contact this Morrison person," Maria said finally. Victor pulled out a pen and wrote something on a napkin. "This is his number, but don't call him tonight. Wait until tomorrow, and when you do call, be honest about your situation. Morrison doesn't help people who lie to him or waste his time." Maria folded the napkin and put it in her pocket. "Thank you for helping me." "I haven't helped you yet," Victor said. "And I need you to understand something. Once you make this call, there's no going back to just hoping Ricci will be reasonable. You'll be committing to a path that could get dangerous quickly." They sat in silence while Victor finished his food. Outside, Maria could see the bus that would take her back to the city approaching the stop across the street. She would have to leave soon or risk being stranded here overnight. "One more thing," Victor said as she got ready to go. "If Morrison does take your case, it's going to take time to build a plan and gather evidence. That means Isabella might be away from you for weeks or even longer. Are you prepared for that?" Maria thought about the question. Was she prepared to not see her daughter for weeks while strangers took care of her? Was she prepared to live with the uncertainty of not knowing if a plan would work? Was she prepared to risk making things worse by involving law enforcement? "I'm prepared to do whatever it takes," she said. Victor nodded. "Then good luck. You're going to need it." Maria caught the bus back to the city and spent the long ride thinking about everything Victor had told her. By the time she got home, it was almost midnight. The apartment felt even emptier than before. Isabella's crib seemed to mock her from the corner of the bedroom. The silence was so complete that Maria could hear her own heartbeat. She lay down on her bed, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow she would call Jake Morrison and hope that a bounty hunter she had never met would be willing to help her take on criminals who held her baby. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was the only hope she had. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Maria made a promise to herself and to Isabella. She would not give up. She would not accept that her daughter was gone forever. She would find a way to bring her baby home, no matter what it cost or how dangerous it became. The last thing she heard before sleep took her was the sound of Mrs. Rodriguez humming a lullaby next door, and Maria wondered if Isabella was hearing someone sing to her tonight, or if she was crying alone in the dark. Maria woke up to sunlight streaming through her bedroom window and the sound of her phone ringing. For a brief, beautiful moment, she forgot about everything that had happened yesterday. Then reality crashed back, and she remembered that Isabella's crib was empty and her daughter was somewhere with strangers who had taken her as payment for Roberto's debt. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Maria answered cautiously, expecting it to be Carlos or one of his associates calling to check on her. "Mrs. Santos, this is Jake Morrison. I understand you might need some help finding someone." Maria sat up in bed, instantly alert. She hadn't called Morrison yet. Victor had only given her the number last night. "How did you get my number?" "Victor Delacroix contacted me early this morning. He explained your situation and thought I should reach out to you directly. I hope you don't mind." Maria looked at the clock. It was only 7 in the morning. Victor must have called Morrison immediately after leaving the diner last night. "No, I don't mind. I was planning to call you today anyway." "Good," Morrison said. "I'm in your neighborhood right now doing some research on your case. Can you meet me at the coffee shop on Maple Street in 30 minutes? The one next to the hardware store." Maria knew the place. It was only 3 blocks from her apartment. "How will I recognize you?" "I'll be the guy in the brown leather jacket reading a newspaper and drinking black coffee." "And Mrs. Santos? Bring any documents you have related to your husband's business dealings. Everything might be important." After Morrison hung up, Maria quickly gathered all of Roberto's papers from the kitchen table and put them in a large envelope. She threw on jeans and a sweater and walked to the coffee shop, her mind racing with questions about what Morrison might have already discovered. The coffee shop was busy with people stopping for breakfast before work. Maria spotted Morrison immediately. He was exactly what she had imagined a bounty hunter would look like, tall and lean with weathered skin and alert eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. The brown leather jacket was well worn, and his boots looked like they had walked through plenty of rough places. "Mrs. Santos," he said, standing up when she approached his table. "Thank you for meeting me on short notice." Morrison ordered coffee for Maria and waited until they were both seated before speaking again. His voice was calm and professional, but there was something in his manner that made her feel like he was already working on her case. "Victor told me the basics, but I need to hear the details directly from you," Morrison said. "Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out." Maria told him everything, from Roberto's gambling problems to the failed grocery store to the men taking Isabella yesterday afternoon. Morrison listened carefully and took notes in a small leather notebook. He asked specific questions about times, names, and exactly what Carlos had said about the papers Roberto had signed. "These papers Carlos showed you," Morrison said when she finished her story. "Did you get a good look at them?" "Not really. I was too scared and upset to read them carefully. But he said Roberto had signed something that made our family collateral for the debt." Morrison nodded. "That's what I figured. The thing is, Mrs. Santos, there's no legal document in this country that would allow someone to use a baby as collateral for a debt. Even if Roberto signed something, it wouldn't be enforceable in court." "But Carlos seemed so sure about it." "Carlos was counting on you not knowing your rights," Morrison explained. "These people use fake paperwork and legal-sounding language to intimidate their victims. It's psychological warfare. They make you think you have no options when you actually do." Maria felt a flicker of hope for the first time since yesterday. So what they did was illegal? Absolutely. What they did was kidnapping, pure and simple. The problem is proving it in a way that will hold up in court and get your daughter back safely. Morrison opened his notebook and showed Maria a page covered with names, addresses, and phone numbers. "I spent most of the night researching Tony Ricci's operation. He's been careful to stay under the radar, but he's not invisible. I found 3 properties he owns or controls that might be where they're keeping Isabella." Maria looked at the list. 2 of the addresses were in the city, but one was a house in a rural area about an hour away. "How do we find out which one?" "We don't just find out," Morrison said. "We confirm it, and then we build a case that will get law enforcement involved. But I need to warn you about something first. This isn't going to be a simple rescue operation. If we move too fast or make mistakes, Ricci's people could disappear with Isabella before the authorities can act." Morrison explained that he had contacts in both local and federal law enforcement who specialized in organized crime. If he could gather enough evidence of Ricci's illegal activities, including the kidnapping, they could coordinate a raid that would shut down the operation and rescue Isabella. "How long will that take?" Maria asked. "Probably 2 to 3 weeks if everything goes according to plan." The thought of Isabella being away from her for weeks more made Maria's chest tighten with anxiety. What if something happens to her during that time? What if they decide she's too much trouble and— "They won't hurt her," Morrison said firmly. "Victor was right about that. Ricci is a criminal, but he's not stupid. Hurting a baby would bring down more law enforcement attention than he could handle. Your daughter is safer than you think." Morrison pulled out a contract from his jacket pocket. "This is my standard agreement for cases like this. My fee is $15,000, but I don't require payment until the case is successfully resolved. If I don't get Isabella back, you don't owe me anything." Maria looked at the contract. Even if Morrison succeeded, She still wouldn't have $15,000 to pay him. "I can't afford this," she said quietly. "Read the fine print," Morrison said with a slight smile. Maria found the clause he was referring to. In cases involving child recovery, Morrison accepted payment plans over 5 years with no interest. The monthly payment would be less than what Maria used to pay for childcare when she was working at the diner. "You would trust me to pay you over 5 years?" Maria asked. "Mrs. Santos, I've been doing this for 12 years. I can tell which clients will honor their commitments and which ones won't. You'll pay me because getting your daughter back is the most important thing in the world to you." Maria signed the contract without hesitation. Morrison was right. She would work multiple jobs and live on nothing but rice and beans for 5 years, if that's what it took to pay him back. "Now, here's what's going to happen," Morrison said, putting the contract away. "I'm going to start surveillance on the 3 properties I identified. While I'm doing that, I need you to try to contact Roberto. I believe he's somewhere in Nevada, probably Las Vegas or Reno. If I'm right, he's still gambling, which means he's leaving a paper trail." Morrison gave Maria a phone number for a private investigator in Las Vegas who owed him a favor. "Call this guy and tell him I sent you. His name is Eddie Chen, and he specializes in finding people in casinos. If Roberto is out there, Eddie will find him within a few days." "What do I say to Roberto when we find him?" "You tell him to get on the next plane back here because his daughter has been kidnapped by the people he borrowed money from. You tell him that if he doesn't come back and face this situation, he's going to lose his family forever." Maria thought about the conversation she might have with Roberto. Part of her wanted to scream at him for destroying their lives. Part of her just wanted him to come home and help her figure out how to fix things. But mostly she wanted him to see what his gambling had cost them. Morrison finished his coffee and stood up. "I need to get started on surveillance. I'll call you tonight with an update. In the meantime, contact Eddie Chen and see if he can locate Roberto. The sooner we find your husband, the stronger our case becomes." As Morrison walked toward the door, Maria called after him. "Mr. Morrison, why are you helping me? Victor said you usually work for money, not out of charity." Morrison paused and looked back at her. "My daughter would be about Isabella's age if she had lived," he said simply. "Some cases are personal." Maria spent the rest of the morning trying to call Eddie Chen in Las Vegas. When she finally reached him, he sounded like he was calling from inside a casino. Slot machines and conversation echoed in the background. "Jake Morrison sent you, huh?" Eddie said. "That guy saved my ass once in Tucson. What do you need?" Maria explained that she was looking for her husband, Roberto, who had probably been gambling in Nevada for the past 4 months. She gave Eddie Roberto's full name, social security number, and the little bit of information she had about his gambling habits. "Roberto Santos," Eddie repeated. "Yeah, I think I might have seen that name before. Give me 24 hours, and I'll tell you exactly where he is. Jake's friends get the express service." While waiting to hear from Eddie, Maria cleaned her apartment obsessively. She washed all of Isabella's clothes and reorganized the baby supplies that had been left behind. She needed to stay busy to keep from going crazy with worry and anger. That evening, Morrison called with his first surveillance report. "I've confirmed that Ricci owns all 3 properties, but I've only seen activity at 2 of them. The house in the rural area looks like it's being used as a safe house. I saw Carlos Mendez arrive there this morning with supplies that included baby formula and diapers." Maria's heart jumped. "So Isabella is there?" "Probably, but I need to confirm it before we involve law enforcement. Tomorrow I'm going to get closer to the property and try to get visual confirmation. If I can photograph Isabella at that location, we'll have the evidence we need to move forward." The next morning, Eddie Chen called from Las Vegas with news about Roberto. "Found your husband," he said. "He's been staying at a cheap motel near downtown and gambling at the Golden Nugget most nights. But here's the interesting part. He's not losing money anymore. In fact, he's been winning pretty consistently for the past 2 weeks." Maria was shocked. In all the years she had known Roberto, he had never gone more than a few days without losing whatever money he had. "Are you sure it's him?" "Positive. I watched him play blackjack for 3 hours last night. He's up about $18,000 from what I could observe. The weird thing is, he doesn't seem happy about winning. Most gamblers would be celebrating, but this guy looks miserable." Maria realized that Roberto might have finally understood what his gambling had cost him. Winning money now wouldn't bring back his family or fix the damage he had done. "Can you get a message to him?" "Sure, but it's going to cost extra for the personal touch." Maria agreed to pay Eddie's additional fee and gave him a message to deliver to Roberto. "Tell him his daughter has been kidnapped because of the debt he owes, and if he doesn't come home immediately, he'll never see his family again." 2 hours later, Eddie called back. "I delivered your message. Your husband broke down crying right there in the casino. He's booked on a flight that arrives at your airport tonight at 11:30. That evening, Maria waited at the airport arrival gate, not sure what she would say to Roberto when she saw him. She was angry enough to hit him, but she also needed his help to get Isabella back. When he walked through the gate carrying a small duffel bag, Maria was shocked by how much he had changed. He had lost weight, and his clothes looked like he had been sleeping in them for days. "Maria," Roberto said, approaching her cautiously. "I'm so sorry. Eddie told me what happened. Where is Isabella now?" "Kidnapped by your loan shark friends," Maria said coldly. "They took her as collateral for the money you owe them." Roberto's face crumpled with guilt and fear. "I never thought they would go after my family. I thought if I just stayed away long enough, they would forget about the debt." $25,000, Roberto. They don't forget about $25,000. Roberto reached into his duffel bag and pulled out several thick envelopes. "I have the money," he said. "All of it, plus extra for interest. I won big in Vegas. We can pay them back and get Isabella home." Maria stared at the money. After months of struggling to buy baby formula, Roberto was casually carrying more cash than she had ever seen in one place. "It's not that simple anymore, Roberto. They've committed a felony by taking Isabella. We can't just pay them and pretend this never happened." As they drove back to the city, Maria explained Morrison's plan to involve law enforcement and shut down Ricci's operation. Roberto listened silently, occasionally asking questions, but mostly just absorbing the magnitude of what his actions had caused. "I'll do whatever it takes to help," Roberto said finally. "If I have to testify against these people or go to prison myself, I'll do it. I just want our daughter back." When they got home, Morrison was waiting outside their apartment building. He looked grim, and Maria immediately knew something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked. "There's been a development," Morrison said. "About 2 hours ago, federal agents raided all 3 of Ricci's properties simultaneously. They found evidence of loan sharking, money laundering, and several other crimes. But Isabella wasn't at any of the locations." Maria felt the world spinning around her. "Where is she?" "Ricci must have been tipped off that law enforcement was getting close. My contacts think he moved Isabella, and probably several other pieces of evidence to a different location. They arrested Carlos and 3 other associates, but Ricci himself is missing." Roberto stepped forward. "I have his money. Maybe I can trade it for information about where Isabella is." Morrison shook his head. "Carlos isn't talking, and the other men claim they don't know where Ricci went. We're back to square one, except now Ricci knows that law enforcement is actively hunting him." Maria sank down onto the apartment building steps. They had been so close to getting Isabella back, and now she was gone again. This time, they had no idea where to even start looking. "There is one other option," Morrison said carefully. "It's risky, and it might not work, but it's the only lead we have left." "What is it?" Maria asked. Morrison sat down next to her on the steps. "Carlos's girlfriend. Her name is Diana Rodriguez, and she works as a waitress at a club downtown. She might know where Ricci would go to hide when things get hot." "Why would she help us?" because Carlos was arrested tonight, and Diana is probably scared about what that means for her. If we approach her the right way, she might be willing to trade information for some kind of protection or consideration." Roberto pulled out one of the cash envelopes. "What if we offer to pay her for the information?" "Money might work," Morrison agreed, "but we'd have to be careful. If Diana is loyal to Carlos, she might just take the money and lie to us. Or worse, she might tell Ricci that we're looking for him." They decided to try approaching Diana the next evening when she would be working at the club. Morrison would handle the initial contact since he had experience dealing with people in her situation. Roberto would wait outside with the money in case Diana agreed to help. The next day dragged by slowly. Maria spent most of it staring at Isabella's empty crib and wondering if her daughter was safe wherever Ricci had taken her. Roberto tried to be helpful around the apartment, but Maria could barely stand to look at him. Every time she saw his face, she thought about how different their lives would be if he had never started gambling. At 8 o'clock that evening, they drove to the club where Diana worked. It was a run-down place in a rough part of town, the kind of establishment that catered to people who wanted to drink away their problems without anyone asking questions. Morrison went inside while Maria and Roberto waited in the car. Through the dirty windows, they could see flashing neon signs and people moving around in the dim interior. After what felt like hours, Morrison came back out with a woman who looked to be in her 30s with bleached blonde hair and tired eyes. "This is Diana," Morrison said when they reached the car. "She's willing to talk, but not here. Too many people who might report back to Ricci's organization." They drove to an all-night diner in a different part of town, where Diana ordered coffee and chain-smoked cigarettes while she told them what she knew. "Tony freaked out when he heard about the raids," Diana said. "He called Carlos right before the cops showed up and told him to get rid of anything that could be used as evidence. Carlos managed to get the baby out just before the federal agents arrived." "Where did he take her?" Maria asked. Diana looked nervous. "I shouldn't be telling you this. If Tony finds out I talked to you, I'm dead." Roberto pushed one of the cash envelopes across the table. "There's $5,000 there. There's more if you can help us get our daughter back." Diana looked at the money, then at Maria's desperate face. "Carlos took the baby to Tony's cousin in Atlantic City. The cousin runs a small hotel there, nothing fancy, but it's clean and safe. Tony thought it would be a good place to keep the baby until things cooled down." Morrison was already taking notes. "What's the cousin's name and the name of the hotel?" "Frank Ricci, and the place is called the Seaside Inn. It's right on the boardwalk, about 3 blocks from the main casino area." Diana gave them more details about Frank and the hotel, including the fact that Frank had young children of his own and would probably take good care of Isabella. She also warned them that Frank was loyal to Tony and wouldn't give up the baby easily. "There's something else," Diana said as they prepared to leave. "Tony's planning to leave the country soon. He has connections in Mexico who can help him disappear permanently. If he takes the baby with him, you'll never see her again." Morrison paid Diana the $5,000 and gave her another $1,000 as a bonus for the warning about Mexico. After Diana left, they sat in the diner and planned their next move. "Atlantic City is about 4 hours from here," Morrison said. "If we leave now, we can be there by sunrise, but we need to be smart about this. If Frank sees us coming, he might call Tony and warn him." Roberto was ready to drive to Atlantic City immediately and demand Isabella back, but Morrison convinced him that they needed to involve law enforcement again. This time, they had specific information about where Isabella was being held, which would make it easier for authorities to act quickly. Morrison spent an hour on the phone with his federal contacts, explaining the situation and providing the information Diana had given them. By midnight, a coordinated operation was being planned between federal agents and Atlantic City police. "They'll move at dawn," Morrison told Maria and Roberto. Federal agents will secure the hotel while local police handle crowd control and evacuate other guests. If Isabella is there, they should have her in protective custody within hours. Maria couldn't sleep during the drive to Atlantic City. She kept thinking about seeing Isabella again after almost a week apart. Would her daughter recognize her? Had Isabella been crying for her mother? Had the people taking care of her been kind and gentle? They arrived in Atlantic City just as the sun was rising over the ocean. Morrison drove them to a police command post that had been set up in a parking lot about 6 blocks from the Seaside Inn. Federal agents were making final preparations for the operation, checking equipment and reviewing building plans. Agent Sarah Mitchell, who was leading the operation, briefed them on what would happen next. We've confirmed that Frank Ricci and at least 2 other adults are in the hotel, along with what appears to be an infant. We're going in with a search warrant in exactly 10 minutes. Maria and Roberto were told to wait at the command post until the operation was complete. They wouldn't be allowed near the hotel until agents had secured the building and confirmed that Isabella was safe. The next 20 minutes were the longest of Maria's life. She watched the clock and listened to radio chatter from the agents as they moved into position around the hotel. At exactly 7 o'clock, she heard Agent Mitchell's voice over the radio. "Go, go, go!" More radio chatter followed as agents entered the building and began searching room by room. Maria caught fragments of conversation about suspects in custody and evidence being secured. But she didn't hear anything about Isabella until Agent Mitchell's voice crackled through the radio again. "Command, this is Mitchell. We have the baby. Repeat, we have the baby. She appears to be in good health and is being brought to the command post now." Maria started crying before she even saw the police car approaching. When it stopped and Agent Mitchell got out carrying a familiar pink blanket, Maria ran toward them without thinking. Inside the blanket was Isabella, awake and alert and beautiful. "Mama's here," Maria whispered as Agent Mitchell placed Isabella in her arms. "Mama's here, and you're safe now." Isabella looked at her mother for a moment with curious eyes, then smiled the way she always did when Maria picked her up in the morning. That smile was worth more than all the money Roberto had won in Las Vegas, or all the fear they had endured over the past week. Roberto stood next to them with tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he kept saying to both Maria and Isabella. "I'm so sorry for what I did to our family." Agent Mitchell told them that Frank Ricci had been arrested and was cooperating with authorities. He had confirmed that Tony Ricci was planning to leave for Mexico that afternoon and had provided information about Tony's location. "Your daughter was well cared for," Agent Mitchell assured Maria. "Frank's wife has 3 children of her own, and she treated Isabella like one of them. She was fed, cleaned, and attended to properly the entire time." As they drove back home with Isabella safely in her car seat, Maria thought about everything that had happened since the day Carlos knocked on her apartment door. The terror, the desperation, the help from unexpected allies, and finally the relief of holding her daughter again. Roberto had redeemed himself by coming back and helping to find Isabella, but Maria knew their marriage would never be the same. Trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild. But they had their daughter back, and that was what mattered most. Jake Morrison followed them back to the city to complete his final report. As they sat in the apartment where this whole nightmare had begun, Isabella contentedly drinking a bottle in her mother's arms, Morrison explained what would happen next. "Tony Ricci was arrested at the airport trying to board a flight to Cancun," Morrison said. "He'll be facing federal charges for kidnapping, among other things. Carlos and the others will probably testify against him in exchange for lighter sentences. This case is going to destroy his entire operation." Morrison's fee had been paid from Roberto's casino winnings, with enough left over for Maria to pay rent and buy groceries for several months while she looked for work. Roberto had promised to get help for his gambling addiction and to find legitimate employment to support his family. "There's one more thing," Morrison said, as he prepared to leave. Diana Rodriguez asked me to give you this. He handed Maria a small envelope. Inside was a card with a simple message. I'm glad you got your baby back. Take care of her. As Morrison drove away and Roberto went to the store to buy dinner, Maria sat in the quiet apartment with Isabella in her lap. Her daughter was safe, her family was together, and the people who had taken her child were in custody. It wasn't a perfect ending. There would still be court dates and testimony. Roberto would still have to prove he could change, and Maria would still have to rebuild her trust and her life. But it was enough. Outside, the sun was setting, and Maria could hear Mrs. Rodriguez humming next door. This time, the sound made her smile. She looked down at Isabella, who was falling asleep in her arms, and whispered the promise she had made a week ago. Mama will always protect you. Always. The nightmare was over. Now the real work of healing and rebuilding could begin.